Hi, and thank you for joining me. I'm Mark Chussell, founder of Advanced Competitive Strategies. Shiny Companies is an ACS strategy story, a brief presentation on a single strategy subject. Now, the short version of this slide is that I have been in competitive strategy for 45 years and done a lot of things. The thing is, we love shiny objects and we love shiny companies. We benchmark them, the companies that is, and we want to emulate them. We love shiny objects, not dull objects. We look for shiny lessons, not dull lessons. Apple, which is number 4 on the 2020 Fortune 500 list, did X. I want to do X. CVS Health, number 5 on the Fortune 500 list, did Y. Y is for yawn. No disrespect to CVS Health. But the opposite of a shiny company is a dull company. Should we love them too? Well, that's a cute dog, but I want to be like Apple. I want to be shiny. Here's the 50 largest companies in the United States by revenue, and they are from the Fortune 500 list. There's lots of familiar names there. There's also some names that might surprise you and that surprised me. So which of these companies are shiny and which of them are dull? These are my nominations. The ones that are in green, I think of as being shiny based on name recognition, use of technology, newsworthiness. You might disagree, and that's fine. I don't think that it'll change any of the messages in this strategy story. Dull companies account for 73% of Fortune 50 revenue. Maybe we ought to pay more attention to the dull companies. They're big, and many of them have been in business for a long time. Dull companies employ 71% of Fortune 50 workers. That tells us something of the importance of these companies to the economy. They also account for 85% of the assets held by the Fortune 50. Then there's market value. Shiny companies have 62% of Fortune 50 market value. I wonder if market value is the reason we're so enamored of shiny. Wealth gives us tales of fame and celebrity, of exotic innovation, of hitting the jackpot, as opposed to maintaining a machine that's been humming along for a while. We can name the CEOs of shiny companies, but not the CEOs of dull companies. So who should we emulate, the shiny companies or the dull companies? It's a trick question. The trick is that the question assumes we will learn something valid regardless of whether a company is shiny or dull. When we emulate a company, we implicitly say this: if we do what they did, we'll get what they got. When we think about emulation that way, the assumptions and logical shortcuts there are just breathtaking, not the least of which is that we can always find a counter-argument, someone who says, well, I know another company that did the same thing and they tanked. When we point to just one or two things that companies did, we reduce complex successes and failures to one or two actions, one or two personality traits. So Steve Jobs was a visionary who pushed hard for products that were insanely great. That's true. What about the black turtlenecks? I mean, seriously, they were part of the Gestalt. Did they help to inspire people? What about the human resources department that hired teams of extraordinary engineers? What about the competitors who were too slow to follow? When Apple introduced the soft keyboard on their phones, should BlackBerry have abandoned its hard keyboard, which many customers loved? Now, the answer to that might seem obvious today, but it was an excruciating decision at the time. Notice, by the way, that Apple competitors are catching up with Apple. In my workshops, I ask people to name a company that succeeded. The most common answers are Apple and Tesla. I ask them why Apple and Tesla succeeded. They never say that the reason for those companies' success is that competitors failed. They always talk about the ineffable, magical auras of Steve and Elon. I'm not saying anyone is right or wrong. I think I think that the real thing is that we want there to be heroes because we want to be heroes. And you see, there's no great mystery. If you want to get 100% market share and be hailed as the solution to all problems, all you have to do is to offer perfection for free. That's what disruptors do. Well, not exactly perfection and not exactly free. And for example, there are internet browsers that are awfully good and they're free, but it's hard to be truly, completely free. There's advertisements and tracking. So if it's free, as they say, you are the product, not the customer. But isn't perfection for free the ultimate capitalist dream? Our capital will do all the work and let we, the people, enjoy our lives. Let's talk about the dubious clarity of the interpreted past. I love that line. I can hardly believe I wrote it because it's almost poetry. I say it as often as I can. The dubious clarity of the interpreted past. Ah, that felt good. But there's a more serious word for what I call our interpreted past. That word is experience. We use our experience, our interpreted pasts, to create the stories that we use to explain the past, stories about what works and what fails. We make up stories and we believe our stories, and we make big decisions based on our stories. We make up stories about how utterly clear and obvious something is, and then we leave out the part about why we didn't see things coming if it were so utterly clear and obvious. And I'll add this: hindsight is not 2020. If it were 2020, why do we tell different stories about the past? In business war games, I've heard executives say that a move is impossible only to discover that their other ideas won't work, and then suddenly they find ways to make the impossible possible. Emulation goes too far. So Apple introduced a soft keyboard on their smartphones, but Kellogg's does not need to put a soft keyboard on its boxes of breakfast cereal. Inspiration, though, is another matter. It can come from desperation, as in those business war games. It can come from perspiration, as in trying and finally making a breakthrough. And it can come from admiration, looking at other companies and getting ideas from them. American folk singer Arlo Guthrie said, "You can't have a light without a dark to put it in." I'll say, if you have a dark, put a light in it. Who knows what you'll find? Don't worry whether it's shiny or dull. Worry about whether it's useful and inspirational. And that's the end. Or maybe not. So please contact me for solutions to many strategy problems. Contact me if you would just like to talk about what you've heard here. I love discussing this stuff. And thank you very much for joining me.